Thank you so much, Jane. And you know, when she spoke of her late husband Sidney's passion for the arts, she mentioned the crucial phrase, well, not just the arts, but how the arts should be involved in everything. And that's really been the mission of this program as it's grown. I've been the director of the Aspen Institute Arts program for 2 years, virtually to the day. And over these last 2 years, we've begun exploring a variety of topics, but the last year has been spent on the subject of citizen artists. And that has grown in its definition exponentially since even we first uttered the words. It's not just about artists participating, it's also about citizens themselves having access to the arts, to participate, to have their rights to participate and gain all the benefits from the arts. And over the next days at the Ideas Festival, we have a track entitled aptly Citizen Artists, which explores many of these areas, from design to diplomacy to education to transformation really through the arts and to public art in cities, all ways in which the arts intersect beyond simply being merely excellent. And for our first foray, we have something that has also been in development over the last years, which is the role of the Harman-Eisner Artist in Residence at the Institute. Whereas originally it was to come here to the Ideas Festival, to present, to share, to be a part of things, it's now a year-round programming involving all kinds of different appearances around the country and indeed internationally, engaging in conversations and in programs to benefit the world through the arts, to find ways to create coordinative elements. So when I spoke with Yo-Yo, and he was becoming our wonderful artist in residence for this entire year, and in fact, we've dropped the fact that it's a year. It's a growing team of artists in residence, really, so it's not like it ever ends, I'm happy to say. He immediately said, and I said to him, you know, so in this role, you have the opportunity to participate in symposiums. We had an art strategy group, for instance, one of the first things we did in New York, where Yo-Yo participated, and we did a culminating event involving students and demonstrating success through the arts, which we'll repeat a version of on Friday over in the Benedict Music Tent at 2:40. You'll want to be there for that, a whole variety of ways that the arts can benefit education specifically. But he said, what else can I do? And I said, well, you can come to Ideas Festival and we can do discussions for wonderful people who can go back to their homes and spread the best practices and the methods that we've been developing. And I said, well, maybe you want to bring together a group yourself. And he said, that's what I want to do. So he came back to me and he said, I want to convene a group of conductors and music directors, people who have their own orchestras, who can develop ways to collaborate with each other better, to collaborate with their communities better, to make a difference beyond simply being a great orchestra. So that's how this all began, and we've been meeting over the last days here in Aspen, discussing these things, led by Yo-Yo. And I'll just turn it over to you right now and say, so does that an accurate reflection of why you wanted to do this?
Absolutely. I think I love bringing people together. And Damien,
yes, I've been known to call him the serial collaborator.
Yeah.
So he's, yeah.
Yes, we all eat cereal in the morning and then we collaborate. But Damien is a wonderful collaborator because he is fearless. And I love this guy. We've gone into more situations. I'm not even going to go into it, but he is a leader, he is an organizer, and the reason we wanted to bring this group together is because conductors are leaders, they are artists, they're organizers, they are scholars, they are performers, they are creators, and they're also leaders in their communities. And the group here, with the exception of Martha, who's not a conductor, Martha Gilmer is the artistic administrator of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and we've worked very closely together. And this group is a very specific group of people who are, let's say, in their 40s, early 50s. So all middle range, you've had lots of experience, and they've seen pretty much most of our world, our industry, and they have got 40 more years of work to do. So that's a good time to talk to one another and figure out, well, where are we? Where are we in society? You've seen things from 30, 35 years ago. Bob and I just talked about that. And how have things changed? we have a feeling that this is a moment of change, of possible change, whether we like it or not, but we actually want to be ahead of the curve in that change that is arriving at our doorstep. So that's why this group specifically is convened. These are all really smart people, very well educated, multidisciplinary, and they make fun of me.
That's a unifying element as well.
Absolutely.
That's good. It's good to have the common ground. Well, Yo-Yo, when you say that, this is a singular moment, that's something, that kind of thing gets said, it's a singular moment. This is the singular moment. Well, last year was the singular moment. To me, when I look at the arts in general, and we'll focus down on music particularly, what's changing perhaps are the ways we hear music, the medium, the attention span of the audience perhaps, our own cities, and how they are developing, and the building frenzy that's gone on, new centers that perhaps aren't as integrated with our own cities as necessary. And this creates a new environment, from let's say 50 years ago when Lincoln Center was created. It's a very different thing now. So I wanted to, maybe I'll turn to the great Robert Spano, your director here at the Aspen Music Festival and School. We were just talking at the end of that session about the new criteria that's being developed, about what it is to be a musician, or to be an orchestra in today's world, and how that requires perhaps different things than originally, let's say, when we all started on our respective artistic careers were evident. Would you talk a little about that?
Yeah, I think the orchestra developed in very particular socioeconomic conditions that made sense for it to be what we've known it to be, and we are no longer living in those conditions. You can really see the rise of the orchestra as we've come to know it historically, concurrent with the Industrial Revolution. And then in America, you see it being an influx of European culture brought by really pioneers of music making in this country. Kusevitsky, Theodore Thomas. I'm often asked, do conductors have to do more now? Do music directors have to do more than just music than they used to? I'm sure that Theodore Thomas did a lot more than music, forging the Chicago Symphony into what we know it to be. So I think it's a mistake for us to think that we are singularly challenged. Our challenge might be singular, but the challenge of creating culture in our society, I think, is ongoing and here to stay. I do think we're now living in a world where people don't subscribe to 24 weeks of concerts a year in advance. And we know this because they don't. And as Saul Hurok said, if people don't want to come, nothing can stop them. So I think what we have to examine and what we're trying to grapple with in the orchestral world is a delivery system issue, because what we're delivering people still love. There's more people accessing, studying, playing instruments online, YouTubing, I don't know all those things on that thing, but
Inner tubing is Colorado.
So actually, we're living in a world where music itself is very vibrant, and the challenges we face have to do with how we're going to structure, fund, nurture, and perpetuate the particular form of music making, which is a symphony orchestra, which does have a very special place in the world of music and in the history of music, and I think is an unbeatable experience still. And I do still believe in live music as something that people treasure and value, because we do experience things differently when we're in groups. I think we'll have a different, despite the TED Talks, I think we'll have a different experience, you and I, in this room than we would have if we were Skyping. Absolutely. And I think we still want that as people. We want the social experience to be part of our cultural and artistic experience. So I have great confidence that we will be hearing orchestral music. I have also great confidence that the way we have been funding it, structuring it, and the culture that's grown up around it will be different. And I think that's the conversation that Yo-Yo and I were having that you alluded to, is that change is here, and the question is whether we are passive to that change or whether we actively engage it and steer it in a course that we would like to see it go.
What you're talking about is, experience, first of all. What is the experience? And maybe that's, that's a moving target. There's the concert hall experience. There's the experience of musicians in public places, which is a growing quantity. There's, the experience of musicians in educational settings. There's musicians in diplomatic settings. There are all these kind of experiences. But to me, what might be a touchstone for success is empathy, which you talk about a lot. It's about what is the empathetic experience that relates the music to its society, whether it's on a small scale in a city or a town, a city, to a national presence. And I think that was another one of the purposes of this, was to get people talking from different regions who have shared common cause perhaps, but haven't actually made common cause, which is an interesting thing.
Well, I think in the world of big networks, I think conductors stand at the top of the mountain. And my question is, they're incredibly creative people. They are organizers. They're brilliant. What would happen if they came together, and what could they do together that they can't do alone? Now, alone they can do everything. We know that. But they've each done unique things in their own communities. I think Robert has started a whole group of composers called the Atlantic Composers. Martha Gilmer has done so much in her field with multimedia. Just now, the Rivers Festival, and in many ways, the conductors here have been part of the Rivers Festival, part of the Great Mississippi, of which the Ohio and Missouri rivers connect to the Mississippi. It's 31 states that border those rivers. So at a time when our country is, bigger than ever, and there's something that brings it together. There's a common history. Michael, in terms of empathy, just had on Veterans Day, on Memorial Day, did a concert with wounded veterans, and you'll see some of that on Thursday?
On Friday morning.
On Friday morning, for 50,000 people. It was so moving because it was the right combination and timing. It's never been done in that way before. David Allen Miller does what Robert does in Albany. Mayanne does commissions and does citizen musicians in Memphis. Scott conducts in many places, including in Mobile, where he's part of the downtown development of the urban development of Mobile, Alabama. They can learn a lot from each other. Alistair goes off to Brazil and conducts for a week, and he feels that he's recharged from the way that these kids, the people that play in that orchestra, so he can do his work better in Illinois. So the conversations
they all
come
have
from
these
those
individual experiences, these touchstones for their own communities, and I'd love to throw that over to you guys to maybe talk about ones that you've heard from each other that have impressed you or thought about. But we talked about these things in these sessions about how they might be duplicated, and we quickly came up against the fact that a touchstone in one community is not necessarily a touchstone in another. For instance, Michael, why don't you tell us about the World War I connection with Kansas City, which I was unaware of personally.
Well, Kansas City.
Michael Stern, ladies and gentlemen, from Kansas City.
Thank you,
Yes.
David. Kansas City happens to be the home of the only national World War I memorial and museum, dedicated in the late 20s, I think. But a truly moving and important place, more so now that the 100th anniversary of the start of the war is upon us. And we have been working very, very hard in Kansas City to make the orchestra more than just an important performing organization. And I think in the conversations that we've had over the last day and a half, that seems to be the galvanizing element for me. That there is no doubt for any of us that music has to mean something more than providing a passive experience, because there is nothing passive about music. There should be nothing passive about listening to music. There certainly is nothing passive about making music. And if you have that possibility to have an authentic act, which can also be experiencing music in the society of their people in an audience. What do you do with that responsibility? And I think Robert is absolutely right, and I think what Yo-Yo has expressed time and time again is right, that orchestras, even if they are successful, and I'm happy to say that Kansas City is successful, cannot operate in a vacuum alone. It doesn't make any sense in our day and age because music has not changed. The ability of music to be this transformational moment on a very personal level, I mean, it is, after all, it is the prism through which we all experience the world. And without that, we are not really living it in full color. Music and all art does that, but music especially. And so if we have that possibility, how do you make, with the bully pulpit of the orchestra at your disposal, a really significant impact in your community? And as I think of the World War I Museum and the memorial, there are ways to marry that emotional element, that historical reality, and the immediacy of what the artistic expression could be in such a way that makes people learn about and, more importantly, feel something truly essential. So in our conversations about what we could do, the World War I centenary and any project around that being specific to Kansas City, the ability then to develop something truly multidisciplinary, to build a curriculum for school children, to collaborate with other arts organizations in town, to commission new music from gifted composers, to do all of these things which brings a spotlight to this, can then be crafted in such a way that in other places, that kind of essential, true reality that the arts can make a difference right there, right now, can then be shared in other places. And it makes, I think, what we all do stronger. Because I think we need, on some level, to think globally and act locally. But what we do locally has to have some tentacle reach to other communities. And if anything is clear to me, it's that more and more we all have to commit, and I do commit, to the idea that what is good, you know, the water lifting all ships, what is good for music in one place is good for music in America. And we need to be constant advocates for the art form, but mostly for the idea of what music is in our lives and what it can bring to the next generations. Because it's not going away, Robert is right, but it needs our help now more than ever. And so if you have projects in your city that animate you and it gets people excited who may not come to concerts, then they come and they learn about whatever that touchstone is, and then they will be changed. And that is the reason of what we do.
I would go further and say, maybe they don't come. That's okay. Maybe it happens in other places, as you said. Maybe it's not just the goal, how do we get them into the concert hall, but how is music going to infiltrate everything else in the same way, like Sydney described? How are the arts going to infiltrate the great conversations that we're having?
And I think what's really exciting, I'm David Miller, just to sort of follow a little bit on what Robert said, I think this is a time of incredible challenge and incredible opportunity. And what's been so wonderful for the 7 or so of us to sit in a room for 2 days and talk has been that there isn't enough exchange of ideas of what's happening and what could happen in the future. And Yo-Yo's been a great force at pushing us to sort of think big and imagine big. But what seems to really have come out of this discussion is that we're no longer performing institutions. We're sort of evolving into these sort of complete community music resources. And Bob referenced this morning this incredibly important, it was actually a commencement at the Cleveland Institute of Music that Ernest Fleischman, the then executive director of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, gave. And Ernest was a crotchety old guy. He died recently. He's a beautiful, incredible arts leader in the world. And he stood up and he said, "The orchestra is dead." And everybody gasped. That's the commencement, the Cleveland Institute of Music. And he said, "Long live the community of musicians." And his whole idea was that instead of just having an orchestra play concerts on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night, have a community of musicians. He was thinking about big cities, 150 musicians. And any given night, a group of them are playing the opera, a group of them are playing the ballet, a group of them are doing a new music activity, a group of them are doing an education activity in schools, a group of them is teaching, a group of them is recording, a group of them is doing something really adventurous and out of the box. And you build these kind of spokes out of the center, and every once in a while, once a month maybe, they all get together and they have a big Verdi Requiem or a big monumental Yo-Yo Ma Gala or some incredibly fantastic thing. But that's the absolute apex of what's possible, but at least in my mind. But this idea of sort of becoming much more than just an orchestra. An orchestra is great, but there's so much more that we as performing institutions and community organizations have to do to connect to our communities.
When did Mr. Meister Fleischman make the?
It was like 40 years ago. Something
Yeah.
should have been done by now,
Well,
right?
I mean, I would say that
was
leading
more
by
than that.
example is important. I mean, Yo-Yo, your work with Silk Road, those musicians, they are doing those things in various places, even as we speak. One of them is doing something in a school, and one of them is somewhere else. So it is happening. But the question is, how do we share it in a way that it becomes possible? Because we're talking about being adaptable, right? And that came up a lot. Flexible and adaptable, which isn't the first thing that comes to mind when you read about, negotiations among orchestras and things like that. It's not like it's just such an easy, okay, it makes perfect sense. But the work itself, I feel, is so compelling and viable when you think about it and you hear about it. You say, well, of course that makes perfect sense, that it must lead in that direction. Does anybody want to take that up?
Well, as Bob was saying earlier to us, what musicians are expected to do once they come out of music school is so much more than in the past. It used to be you could play your instrument beautifully and then the world owes you a living and that's it. Now, obviously, what we hope to do as leaders of these communities of musicians is to create a vast array of really interesting activities that truly engage the community in all different aspects of the community. Maybe some musicians are good at reading stories to kids and playing their instrument along with those stories to entertain them with music. Maybe some of them are really good at teaching their instruments. Maybe others are just wonderful at chamber music. But whatever it is, they need to be able to find more than just orchestral performance if they expect to thrive as orchestral musicians in the next generation. And so I'm sure you're emphasizing this here, but I wish it were the case at all music schools and all summer music festivals that it means more than it ever did before to be a musician. It's not just playing the notes, even playing the notes brilliantly in an inspired way. You have to find lots of creative ways to connect with the community.
Scott Speck from Mobile, Alabama, just recently appointed conductor of the Chicago Philharmonic, right? And also conductor of the Joffrey Ballet Orchestra in Chicago.
Yo-Yo, I remember when we were first doing work together some years ago, going through ideas of things we could do, and invariably you can imagine scheduling is just a challenge when you're working with an artist like Yo-Yo Ma. He is everywhere at once, it seems. It must be clone versions somehow, it seems. He does so many things. But you still always found time to do things, to play for, sad occasions, happy occasions, to share your work in non-traditional settings beyond education, beyond healthcare, but simply, to do what you called your ecumenical duties, which I thought was such a striking phrase. And I know that, sometimes we think music is celebratory, but it also, to touch us most deeply, sometimes it's about commemorating the sad things and being a part of cathartic experiences. I think about, Bobby Kennedy quoting Aeschylus the night Martin Luther King was shot, and how that calmed a crowd in a sense that like nothing else could. It was instructive in a way that you couldn't duplicate. And I know that Mayan, your work has grown to encompass that as well with your Dream Project to galvanize community. And I would say that Mayan is also a bit of similar to Scott and to others on the panel. They have more than one home, if you will. So we have a built-in network kind of in one person in some cases between Chicago Sinfonietta and Memphis. But would you tell us a little about the Dream Project and how that's your touchstone and how that might be shared as well with other communities?
Sure. Well, the Memphis Symphony, when I entered the organization 3 years ago, it's an organization that realized it's a community supportive and community serving organization. They would not survive without having a role in the community. And so we basically started a fundraising idea, a philanthropic circle called Mayan Circle of Friends. I was new in town. They were trying to get me some new friends. That's how it started. And so everybody pays $1,000 to join the circle, to sponsor someone else to join the circle. And it started with private gatherings in people's homes. Yes, I do have to show up and make new friends. It was scary. I don't know what's going to lead to the next thing. And then very organic question emerged because we asked the question, how could the symphony play a role in bettering the city of Memphis? But we really listened. We didn't have the answer. But what's really forming out of the circle is amazing to see, in the same living room, white ladies mingling with black ladies, Latino background, just all of a sudden this very diverse background in Memphis that's very historic for us. And so these leading ladies went one step further, asking the question, what's really stopping the city from growing? And it was that one event in 1968, Dr. King's assassination, that really split the city, really stopped it from coming forward. So they started to think of unthinkable, which is to use the symphony as a catalyst of change. Maybe it is possible for us to have a community concert, but it's really driven by the community in terms of what the community wants to hear. But more importantly, bringing everybody together. And so a very beautiful commission started to emerge, what we call the Dream Project. And they wanted to embrace the past wound so we can hold hands together and move forward together, creating a better future for future generations. So it's inspired by Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, but it doesn't stop there. It continues to go forward because it's the gift of these women that not only we want to create a piece that captures all the important essence of humanity, but also as a gift to send it to other parts of the country. Memphis is known as a music city, but mostly rock and roll blues. So the symphonic, how do we play a role? It's the gifts of these ladies to give to our colleagues around the country of something that, as a model to bring the community together. It's a piece about 35 minutes long with a last movement creating a surround sound effect involving, for Memphis, gospel choirs, youth choirs. Just get as many people in the door. Doesn't matter what it looked like at the end. If we're all holding hands at the end, singing together, even better. And so we're just trying to create something to bring the community together. And so we can share that to other community. When you have a traumatic event, use the music as a vehicle to come together and heal.
Beautiful. Alistair, so I'm curious, I mean, this is on the spot a little bit, but your impressions a little bit and how it relates to your own work. I mean, I know you talked about 3 different cities, from Brazil to Qatar to Springfield, Illinois, and you gave us different impressions of how your work relates to each one. And you had your own touchdown in Springfield, Illinois as the birthplace of Lincoln. But how's your thinking evolved, if at all, or been reinforced by these conversations with your colleagues?
Well, I feel it's an honor to be here, and I feel that I've become a better conductor, and I will be a better music director for having spent these last 24 hours with these people. Hands down, I think we all perhaps feel the same way. My experiences in these 3 incredibly different cities has been just mind-blowing in one sense. One place in Brazil is so poor. It's a model based on the Venezuela El Sistema system for education for youth orchestras, and I've worked with this since it started about 6-7 years ago. And to see this project grow, to see these kids who don't have anything except maybe an instrument and several hours every afternoon to practice, to come together in their own way suitable for their city, has just been amazing. And the support that's garnered from the community when the politics changed hands recently, and the chap who started it, who was best friends with the mayor, is now out of power, and the new mayor isn't a supporter of classical music or the educational system. So all the community, the mums and dads, wrote letters and knocked on the door of this new mayor to be saying, look at what this orchestra has done for my children, look what it's doing for our community. And they have forced this new mayor to keep the music alive, which is just remarkable. And when I go there, they don't have anything else. They have poverty, and they have well, they have football, soccer, of course, because that's what Brazil is all about. Well, it remains to be seen with the World Cup coming up. But and they have music. It means so much to them. And the desire in those rehearsals, I've not felt from any other orchestra in the world. These are young professionals, I'd say, from the age 16 to 30. It makes up the group. It's just so soul-inspiring. So I bring that to wherever else I go. Go to the other side of the coin, and I've just come back from conducting the Qatar Philharmonic Orchestra in Doha, the other side of the world. And there they don't have any money problems. There, I just learned there's the highest per capita of millionaires in the world, in any country, in Doha. And the hotels, the breakfasts, it's just amazing. Yes, more millionaires than Aspen, is that right? Yeah. and well, Aspen isn't a country, is it? Is Aspen a country?
It's seceding soon.
It's seceding soon. And there the orchestra has no financial concerns, and yet its concerns are so much deeper because how does a classical orchestra survive in a community, in a culture that has never embraced orchestral music? It's a brainchild of the Queen of Qatar, who wanted, of course, she wants to educate her people. She's done everything she can, from building roads to building universities to planting trees to everything is imported. It's the most incredible country. It's very safe compared to other parts in the Middle East. And of course, you need an orchestra to complete that culture picture. And the musicians of the orchestra are all highly talented, skilled, auditioned from around the world, mainly I'd say European, Eastern European, incredible musicians. They play to an extraordinarily high standard, and they're passionate in what they do. But they have an audience that, well, they don't have an audience. No one really comes because no one really cares. The Arab community don't really know, and yet they do Arab premieres all the time. They certainly reach out and do everything you think you could do, but it's really quite incredible with the situations there. But to have that back to back, week to week, to see that the two differences, and yet I'm still in the same place musically, but I've moved around the world, and then to bring that to my experience now as music director with the Illinois Symphony Orchestra, and I'm kind of on my own Silk Road as a guest conductor. We all are as guest conductors, pulling the best of each part of the world that we go to, each orchestra, and bringing them to our own community. And along with these few days together, it's to see how important these connections are between the community and the orchestra, how we can share these amongst ourselves as colleagues, joined together by the same river of life in moving towards global and total accessible music, to make it totally relevant to us, and to find our own touchstones, and yet to be inclusive and to help each other.
To add to that, I think what Alistair just said is so extraordinarily important, in that you notice on the face of it that these three orchestras that he's talking about all need such incredibly different kinds of care from their custodians, from their music directors and so on. Each orchestra either interfaces with the community or doesn't in a different way. And so you would think that there's something very, very different about the way they need to be approached. Of course, we all learn as conductors now, and I wish I had learned it while I was studying. By the way, Aspen School of Music, class of 1988, conducting fellow. First time back in 25 years. It's so great to be here again. But I wish that we had learned back then how important it is to be truly tuned in to what's going on in your own community. But to even transcend that, I've been amazed, actually, what we've been able to do in the last 2 days with the inspiration of Yo-Yo, to figure out how we as conductors can come up with things that benefit not only our community but others. Where can we find the common ground? The common ground is, of course, we're all human. And how do we connect to humanity in the specific situation of our own community? Really amazing thought.
I found, listening to the discussions, there was two different sides of creating these synergies. One is about nuts and bolts. It's economies of scale. well, you did the project, why should we have to redo the whole work? Let's just share it, let's be smart, let's just, talk to each other and make positive change, through simply being intelligent and sharing the work. The other is artistic, what I call artistic habits of mind. It's like how we think about things, which speaks a little bit to the flexibility and adaptability issue. And when you said, we've been in situations and left that hanging in the air, what I thought of, when we've gone into certain schools or classrooms, and it's like Iron Chef. It's like you got all this stuff. You've got, and how are you going to put this together? What are you going to make out of these elements of, wow, that music teacher has really got something going on, and the math teacher seems to be having an issue with, classroom control, and how are we going to, make a team effort, and we put all this together. And in a sense, that's what you guys are tasked with now. Alistair, in wildly really different situations, and yet you are the unifying element, and the need to create a connection with the respective communities, whatever that is. If it's to counteract in a social movement sense poverty in Brazil, or to find a way for a traditional classical music orchestra to connect in Qatar, or to find your touchstone within Springfield, Illinois, which seems relatively easy in some ways by comparison. But I'm sure you learn from all those things. And what I wanted to point out, building on one other thing you said, is that it does make you a better artist. That's the dirty secret. It's reciprocal. It's not like, we're just doing this. It's not altruistic. Yay, it's so nice what we do. It makes you better musicians. I'm a better dancer, better director, better whatever it is, to put yourself in those adaptive situations. Right? I mean,
in a funny way, the event that we crashed yesterday.
Yes.
The
Crashers.
The Franklin Project, which is all about the idea of national service for young people between ages of 18 and 28. An amazing excitement was building up around that idea, where people felt this was the idea whose time has come. And the dirty little secret there was that, that when people do national service, it's a deep form of happiness. And,
it is.
And that's, I think what
you
you're talking
talk about connecting to something larger than yourself.
But can I just say something? Because I think it's an interesting thing to realize based on what Robert was saying. And I think we should hear from Martha, because especially the Chicago Symphony is about as iconic an orchestra in the United States as there is. And so when you think about orchestras, and certainly about what Robert said about the evolution of orchestras in the United States, and Theodore Thomas, and the way the New York Philharmonic was founded in 1842, that's a long time to consider what some communities in America thought was important enough to put all of this work into, and how that became such an important part of our cultural landscape. But you're right, the times are different. And it's a kind of futile exercise to contemplate what an orchestra is.
Feudal?
Yes, because feudal. Oh, not futile, feudal.
Checking.
Thank you, Damien. Because there are some people still who adhere to this idea that the conductor is here somewhere between Mount Olympus and paradise, and everybody the minions sort of are there below, and there is there's no other way to do it. I think there are two kinds of conductors in the world. One who see the world that way, and I think those are the lesser kind, and the others who stand in front of the orchestra and realize that you've got 100 highly skilled, highly trained, intelligent, opinionated, for sure, people, all of whom have something to contribute. So now we launch the conversation forward about how we can collaborate, what orchestras can do, what music directors in charge of those orchestras can do to make real change manifest. And on the one hand, making music is always a collective experience. If you sit down in a string quartet, if you're playing with one pianist, even if you're playing a solo Bach suite, you got to make four strings somehow come together, and you've got to find some way to breathe with your public.
What would you know about that?
Well, I've heard say. But I do think that there is a tremendous pay no attention to that side of the stage for a moment. I do think that there is a tremendous power in using the iconic stature of an organization, and also harnessing the individual creativity and flexibility that each person can then bring to that organization and make the organization far more nimble and effective in making a statement. I mean, you know, orchestras are great for communities, right? The communities look to their orchestras as great, and nowhere more than in Chicago. And yet the orchestra has to be something more than just an institution which makes nice concerts.
Well, I think your point about the music director standing in front of the 100 musicians, I think that one of the things that's on their minds at that moment in rehearsal, but certainly in performance, is being excellent, achieving something on Friday night that they couldn't achieve on Thursday night or the week before, finding in the Beethoven 5 something that they hadn't found together before. But the other very important part that I know is in all of your minds is that there are 2,000 people behind them, each of them coming into the hall that night with a different, from a different place. They're there to need comfort. They're there to want to be moved. They are there because they've listened to the Beethoven 5 all their lives, but have never walked into a concert hall and heard it live. The life experience that comes in those 2,000 people is an important part of all of our lives. And it's not that anyone forgets it, it's just that so many times the people on the stage are trying to match the sound of their stand partner, you know, come in exactly right, be in tune, you know, this. But the whole is what we're all here to do. And I think that's what community becomes. It starts there and it builds out from there. And the sacredness of that experience is what's powerful. I was thinking about the last 2 days and how appropriate it's here in Aspen, because of course in Aspen Grove, if I'm not mistaken, is one organism. The roots are shared and the trees grow up above the ground, but underneath they're all connected. And I think that's what we've learned today and yesterday, is that there's more power. The trees will grow stronger if we understand we're all connected in that way. And so I find it's been a great 2 days.
Nice.
Nice, very nice.
See, we always learn something. This is great.
It's because I don't have to worry about being in tune.
Actually, neither do we. Yo-Yo, what would you know? Could you say something about that?
You see what I take from these guys?
No.
Unbelievable.
He loves it.
Yeah, talk about the work that, your work with Chicago Symphony, creating the Citizen Musician Program, which embodies the idea that musicians are adaptable and they're available to go into circumstances beyond the concert hall, and yet bringing that excellence. And also I wanted to, I never get it quite right, but you talk about technique being there to be transcended. Speaking to a little bit what Martha said, the pressure to be excellent is ever present in any art form, especially in a performing art, where you're playing a piano, you're playing the cello, or you're dancing on the stage. You want to be excellent. That is your goal. But sometimes that gets in your way, actually, of communicating, and that's, I think, part of what the struggle in this change that Robert was describing is and will be, is fighting against that need to be, I would say, merely excellent. It's not really enough anymore. There's got to be something more, and it pays off, obviously. But is that what you try and instill in the musicians you work with, and how you've developed the programs in Chicago, which have taken to schools and to the right in the middle of malls and whatever is available?
I think we try and instill a number of values. One of them is that what you were talking about, technique. We go to school, we learn technique in order so that when we go on stage, we can transcend technique. When someone is showing technique, you always feel it. They're showing you that's what they care about. And obviously what we're talking about is music is much more than that. It's about much bigger ideas and much bigger spaces. It's about transcending all of that. And that's what we want to give our younger musicians, as well as any one of us, the ability to say, this is the moment, this is what counts, this is what's going to make me feel alive. It doesn't matter whether there's a train wreck, the show must go on. But not only must it go on, we are going there with our hearts and our brains on fire. If we can do that for ourselves, and this is why you keep talking about the content part, if we we can do that with our musicians. For example, one of the great things that I thought we tried this year with the Civic Orchestra is that we suggested, and I asked many of you advice on how do you do that, is with the Rivers Festival, we thought Beethoven Pastoral Symphony, perfect piece for the outdoors, thinking about nature. And how about if we gave them a challenge to say, play it without a conductor? And you know what that did? That made them feel they owned the piece. It created a bond that is like your favorite summer at summer camp. You know, friends forever. It made the kids say, I want to form my own conductor. And it's not about, we don't need the conductor. It's not cut out the middleman. It's more like having a lot of conductors giving them their knowledge so they can conduct each other. So it's not about, we can save, you know, let's just, you guys go away. It's much more that they are now the owners.
It's a fine time to bring that up.
Yeah, exactly. They're now the owners that wherever they go, they can replicate the same thing. They can seed something that's as strong as the aspen grove that Martha was talking about. So that's that's one of the things that we tried to do, and to the courage to go into any situation, whether it's an inner city school, figure out the situation, see what the kids need, see what the challenges are for the teacher, and then do the thing that is useful. Yeah. That's what, when we do our education stuff, that's when something good is going to stick.
But you know, you used a perfect word of ownership, which came up a lot in these conversations, and it came up in many contexts, some about making the community have a sense of ownership about the orchestra or about music in general. You're talking about the sense of ownership among the musicians themselves or among an orchestra of the material, that there's not simply players, you know, in an ensemble, but they actually own a piece of it. And that's really at the heart of also this idea of citizen musicianship and citizen artistry, is that it is participating in a different way that gives you ownership. It is not a passive activity. It is an active activity, whether you're in an audience or on the stage or wherever you encounter an art form, that there is this activity level going on, which I think is a change. I mean, in terms of a value, as you would say, right?
I think there's another, this is a little off in a cul-de-sac, but I somehow think it's relevant, so I'll find out how irrelevant this is. But
it's all Hurok rule.
As we keep coming back to the word community and around so much of our discussion, and as you were talking about that project where these musicians encountered Beethoven directly, I'm reminded that one of the communities we all live with is a community of dead people, and we care about them very much. These composers are alive in our recreation of their music all the time, and I think that part of our concern or part of our need to ride the rapids of change that we're living in has to do with wanting to preserve a tradition, because there is something we were all taught and something we all carry and something beautiful about having the capacity to talk with the dead, to engage the mind of Bach, of Beethoven. To live in that community is really quite extraordinary. And from the same Latin root that we get tradition, we get traitor. And I think there's a warning in that fact that we need to be careful as we strive for change. I know that we all at the same time want to preserve something that's very precious, which is our tradition, because we are working out of a tradition, of a real stream. I always loved that I can trace my teachers back to Beethoven, you know, that game.
Well, we started a program in Chicago called Beyond the Score, and it's really a 1-hour live documentary. But what I always say is it brings the composer back into the room and brings them alive for the audience. And to me, that's one of the missing connections. You understand it, and the players understand it. You've studied this composer, but even then, many of our performers, many of the orchestra musicians don't know what was going on in that composer's life, what was going on in the time. Music was created in a specific time, in a specific place, in reaction to what was going on in their personal lives or in the world. And to bring that back into the concert hall preserves the sacred, but makes it relevant, makes it come alive for the audience, and in fact, many of the players. So
Well, and that
I agree
carries
with
to
you.
the context for everybody else as well. And that the idea of what it all means, it starts in the seed of it is within the art form itself, within the musicians and the seance that goes on with the dead, and the learning and the passion for it, which then can be shared with you. And I'm realizing that in the sense of context, we want to throw it open. We have very little time left, but we do have 2 microphones. If we want to have just about 5 minutes of questions, and I will underline that questions would be terrific. There are microphones in the aisles if you'd like to approach and give a brief question to all, one, or any of us.
Communing with the dead.
Thank you for a very interesting hour and a half. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, where we enjoy wonderful music from our orchestra and fabulous instruction in our college conservatory music. I am seeing more initiatives from our students who are reaching out into the community and making a difference for young people who otherwise would never have access to musical instruction. My question is, where are they in this process for you all and for us? And is there a component to the festival's educational curriculum, if you will, that talks about this very element with the students that we have here on campus?
Who wants to grab that? There was a question definitely about the festival. Maybe you want to grab that, Bob. Just about how the training that you're giving at the Aspen Music Festival and School relates to these questions that we've been discussing, perhaps differently than, when David was there.
I think, yes, that music education today, and certainly some institutions more than others, there is a tremendous focus on not just the musical education, but the education of the musician as a citizen of the world. I think the fact that we titled our season this summer Conscience and Beauty speaks to the level at which this institution is committed to the whole person, and many others are as well. And Michael Stern has the highest number of alums from the New World Symphony, which is a fantastic training organization for young musicians. And we were just discussing on the way over here that it's a perceptible difference in the way they approach their role in society, the way they approach their art, and what they value, what they aspire to. It's rather exciting, actually, to see this shift in attitude.
And I also wanted to add that one of the things I was struck most by in the discussions in the last day and a half or so was that 80% of what we discussed had to do with kids and putting instruments in kids' hands and giving young people real, live, living experiences with music. And so I think what we've kind of come to conclude, and what may be very different from years past, or Bob actually pointed out earlier today that in Brahms's time, it was more people making their own music. Or I was telling somebody this morning that, in the early 1800s, everybody made their own music. You couldn't go listen to it anywhere, or only the very rich and the very important could go listen to it elsewhere. But I think there's something coming back where it's really about creating passionate amateurs, both to be the professionals' audiences, but even more profoundly to keep art forms like ours alive.
More
and that's
young
very
people are
exciting.
cooking.
Yep.
Hands-on, because it's personal. And I think the idea that music, it's communal, but it's also incredibly intimate and incredibly personal. A lot of very busy people love to play an instrument because it's the only time they can shut out the rest of the world and commune with their inner selves. And I think those are things that I think we're seeing
but there's one more dimension to that, because if you're talking about young people, if you're going to use music as it should be used, as a basic tool to civilize the intellect and the soul of people growing up, that is important. Then they want to study music professionally, and that was your question. And in Kansas City, a lot of us, and certainly Yo-Yo, works with young people all the time at that level. But we also work with high school students, and we work But then there's another element which I think bears mentioning, because Yo-Yo's on the stage, and Martha, because the whole idea of a citizen artist or a citizen in general implies a contract, a civic contract which has a moral imperative. And if you take your conservatory in Ohio or Juilliard or anywhere else in the world, And you realize that you're training these highly skilled, highly intelligent, highly motivated, creative people for fewer and fewer opportunities, as you say. What is that about? Well, what it's about is there are more ways to use music in the world than just having them follow the traditional path. And if you believe in this covenant of bringing art into the world for real social change, then what we can do in terms of inspiring these young people is to make them, in their DNA, realize that this is a sacred duty, to have this idea of a contract which will be forever a guiding moral imperative for them to bring not only art and beauty, but some kind of change to the world.
That's
I
conscious
wish I had
beauty.
said that. Oh, yeah. Nice.
We are going to have to call it a panel, and I want to say that I think that we could just keep going on that one question. So I'm sorry that we didn't have time for more questions, but I encourage you to come to all of the Citizen Artists events throughout the next days. We're going to look at arts and healthcare, arts and education, arts and design theory and design thinking. We're going to look at arts and veterans. The man who was mentioned who worked just now in Kansas City, Arthur Bloom, is coming here, and he has created this incredible program at Walter Reed. There are so many intersections, citizen artist intersections to be explored, democratizing the arts. Please come to all of our sessions. Thank you so much. Enjoy the ideas.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you, all of the music directors. And most of all, thank you, Citizen Artist in Chief, Yo-Yo Ma.